Good. Wait till we're officially live. Okay. Working. All right, good afternoon. Happy Thursday to everybody.
You?
I hope everyone, I'll share my screen, but I hope everyone got the new source sheet. I know it's a bit of a change than what we were gonna do. But I think we'll still learn some good Torah together. So we'll begin, if we can, with a blessing for Torah study. Baruch.
I don't know.
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirshanu
Tzivanu sod b'divrei Torah.
The prayer before studying Torah. You want to join in or not?
Miriam. Oh, it's we're good. Okay. Shall I share my screen? Does that make it easier for everybody? Yes.
Yes.
That's a tradition here.
Tradition. I know it's different than the Talmud class. Oh. But I will say I made this source sheet in rabbinical school. Oh my gosh, in 2018. I don't know how 6 years ago, I guess almost. So, we'll see how it holds up. But it's from one of, I think, the most powerful lines in the book of Leviticus. It's literally two words. We'll get to it in a minute, but the words are Vayidom Aharon. And Aaron was silent. This takes place right after his two eldest sons die, and he's silent. So we're going to kind of dive into what does that look like? What does mourning in silence look like? Why did Aaron do it? And all of that. So we will, yes, Stan?
It's coincidental that you're doing this today because, of course, the Torah portion and what we talk about in the Talmud class merged this week. So
Yeah, exactly. Um, all right, so we're gonna go verse by verse. So we're just gonna look at, I think, three of the verses from chapter 10. So if someone wants to read Hebrew, English, German, anything, whatever whatever you'd like. Someone want to read that first verse? Nobody? Stan?
well, I'll read. Now Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. They offered before the Lord alien fire, which he had not enjoined upon them.
Okay. So let's just pause there. Let's pretend we don't know what happens next. So we don't look at the verse ahead. What are some thoughts, kushiot, which are kind of like difficulties or questions that might arise just from this verse alone? Yeah, George.
Ace Sarah, strange fire. In other words, there's a prescribed thing they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
And if you go outside that boundary, it's very bad.
Yeah, exactly. That, and Aish Zara Asher Lo Tziva Otam, a
Yeah.
strange fire that God did not command them to do.
Mhm.
Stan?
It's described as his fire as opposed to the community fire that that is the commandment, that each one had their own personal incense, whatever fire. And that's at least how one of the problems is, comes about.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I think maybe God is also telling us not only not to deviate, but he's making a distinction between idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
It's disordered and chaotic, and people are taking another way that's not commanded, and commanding us to have an ordered holiness. What does holiness entail? Because if we're going to imitate the other people and just bring strange fires and dance and drink, because right after that, he's telling them, go into the temple once a year, your zeal is appreciated, but we also have to be anchored in the real world, roots and live.
Yeah. And, we spent the past 2 weeks kind of learning about this new ritual about the sacrifices, right? We're still in the desert. We've built the tabernacle, and now what do we do with it? And we spent time talking about we don't do what they did in Egypt. We don't worship like they did. We have to worship in a specific fashion. There are specific rituals, specific animals, items that can actually be sacrificed. And it's actually important to follow those steps to make ourselves different from the other cultures. And here, Nadav and Abihu, who would have been the priests at some point in their life, they are trying to do something on their own, trying to recreate a ritual and not follow by the book. There's a reason, like, we have a Siddur, or we have specific orders to the way things are done. We can't just go off and do whatever we want, even if it's coming from a place of love and a place of desire to worship God. There still has to be some sort of set order behind it. It's what connects us to our people. It's what makes me think of is when you go to a synagogue anywhere in the world, if you don't speak the common language, you go and you get a siddur, and it might be in, Japanese and Hebrew, but you can follow along in the Hebrew. It's the same prayers. The tunes might even be very similar, and you feel comfortable going into that synagogue. But if every single synagogue had their own customs and there was no order, and, every priest, every rabbi did what they wanted to do, you wouldn't feel that sense of community, which is what they're trying to build in the desert. Steve?
When I read passages like this, my first thought is, I thought God was a merciful God. Couldn't he have explained, or through Moses, explained to these 2 young men, soon to be, hopefully be priests,
Yeah.
hey, don't do this. This is a mistake. Why does it have to be totally unmerciful?
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I mean, Moses shared all of these laws with Aaron and with the Israelites, as far as what, the first portion is focused on every single Israelite, what they have to do, what kind of sacrifices they can bring. Then the second portion is specifically for Aaron and the priests. So whether or not they knew all of the laws, or whether or not they asked questions, to clarify things, we don't know. It's not in our Torah. But they should have known, I think. But God is not.
Did they know they were risking their lives?
I don't know if they knew that they were risking their lives. I believe that they perhaps knew that what they were doing is not what was commanded of them. I saw Jack's hand was up, and then we'll get to Kathleen.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to something you said, that, if each community has their own rules, or each rabbi is doing whatever they want, that it creates chaos. But doesn't the conservative movement provide that the, Mara D'Atra basically decides the legal decisions with maybe 3 or 4 limitations, but other than that, the local rabbi makes the decisions for the community?
Yeah, it's true. That is true. But regarding like a prayer life and a ritual life. That doesn't mean that the rabbi can all of a sudden say, "Oh, we're gonna completely not look at the Siddur and we're gonna we're gonna invite animals into the saying whatever it's gonna be." It still has to follow into the box of what is halachically acceptable.
But doesn't the local rabbi determine what is halachically acceptable, except they can't do intermarriages and
Yeah, but
there's one other thing that they can't
still
do.
still have to follow. There's still a halachic boundaries regarding certain rituals within the movement, certain prayers and certain even like ideas. And it can't be completely removed from that. We still, as RA rabbis,
Mhm.
we still have to follow the halachic authorities of the movement, even though we can ultimately decide what is the service going to look like, as long as we still like you still have to say the Shema in the via in the Amidah, and you still have to read Torah. You can't all of a sudden say, well, this week's Parshat Shmini, but I really want to read Parshat Noach. Like that can't work.
Well, but I mean, the rabbis can decide we're not going to do the Haftorah anymore.
That's true. Yeah, but the Haftarah is not halachically, it's not a requirement of a service.
No, I guess I'm just saying that there's a lot of flexibility in community practice
True. Yeah.
that, I mean, obviously, Messianic rabbis kind of they're not really Jewish. So, I mean, there is an understanding that there are certain parameters, but they're pretty loose.
Yeah. True. Morton?
Yeah, I have a question where it says died at the instance of the Lord. Does that mean that God actually killed them? Or in the alternative, because they started this fire, that was a consequence of what they did? So how should we interpret it? Was it really the act of God that caused their death, or was it just actions that caused death?
So why don't we can you read that verse in English for us where it says, "And fire came forth from the Lord"?
And fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of the Lord.
So if you look at it from in the Hebrew, takes a Hashem, and it came a fire from before God, v'tochal, it consumed them, Hashem, and they died before God.
Right.
So God is there, right? They're in the like they're in the holiest spots, and that is where like God's presence in the desert was dwelling, right? So from that area in the on the altar is where the fire came forth. So they put the fire on, and that is for them. That's where God's presence was dwelling. The fire came out and it consumed them. Whether or not that's God doing it or not is up to interpretation. The Hebrew does make it seem like it is not necessarily God doing the killing, but it is the location of God's dwelling place that has consumed them with their fire. Kathleen?
I think it may be because we don't have with our senses our ability to withstand the full presence of God, because that's come up a lot. That came up at Mount Sinai where they wanted the people to stand back from the mountain, and that our senses, even compared to other animals, are restricted. And if we hear certain sounds, it's too much for us to manage. And I think that's kind of what may have happened. And because it's immediately after that, isn't that sort of in that same section where God then tells that says that the high priest can only enter once a year, because he doesn't want them to get into that same frame of zealousness, which would lure them into a presence where they couldn't manage it.
Exactly. Like only on Yom Kippur, that is when the Kohen Gadol would enter the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies. And even then it was like risky, in the Mishnah, it tells us that on that day on Yom Kippur, when the priest entered the Holy of Holies, they had to tie a rope around his waist and, you know, be ready to pull him back. And they even had like a backup, you know, like a reliever priest in case the priest died on Yom Kippur, because it is very risky to go and to be that close to the presence of God, to be really right next to that fire. And it, you know, it reminds me of the scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, when the Nazis open up the Ark of the Covenant and they all die immediately by the presence of God. We're not supposed to be that close to the divine. Stan?
My understanding with the way the sacrifices were, you know, at the time of the temple was that individuals could bring sacrifices of food or animals or whatever, but never to bring the fire itself or the incense that goes with the fire. That individuals could not do that. Only the community, you know, the way that it was structured and the priests, you know, at the given time. So that's presumably what these two priests did. That wasn't part of a of the way that the sacrifices were instituted. Whether good, bad, or indifferent, that's the way it was.
Yeah, exactly. And they're trying to build something new, and it's really important to set, you know, at first to set those parameters, to set those rituals, and to get comfortable with them before maybe you could like improvise a little bit. But it was, you can't all of a sudden completely change the way things are done. Jack?
You mentioned Raiders of the Lost Ark, so I just had to mention that what you've described is one of the major plot holes with the whole movie. They go through this long thing that they can't let them get that ark, and then it turns out it didn't matter anyway because they got the ark and it dissolved them.
Yeah.
The whole thing was pointless because it didn't matter.
It's just tried though. Okay, let's go on to verse 3. Someone want to read? Anybody? Leora?
ותצא אש, רבי אליעזר או אלעזר, כן, טוב.
Sorry, we're it says Vayomer Moshe.
Oh, sorry. ויאמר משה אל אהרון, הוא אשר דיבר השם, לאמור, בקרבי אקדש ועל פני כל העם אכבד וידום אהרון. By the way, I had a comment on the why did they die? Why did they had to die? The Aaron's sons. I think because they were trying to show that they can do whatever they want without following the orders that were given. So,
do you want to translate the verse into English for us?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
So then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when God said, 'Through those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people.'" And Aaron was silent. All right. So Aaron, you know, witnessed probably a very gruesome moment. Probably extremely terrifying. You know, we can imagine the sounds that were heard from within. And this is what Moses shares to his brother in that moment. And then Aaron has nothing to add.
Rabbi?
Yeah, sorry.
I think you're going to get to that Vayidom.
Yeah.
Usually lishkot is to be silent, you know, like sheket.
Yeah.
However, this is you're struck dumb, you're speechless, you can't even talk, you know, there's no words that you can emote or anything.
Yeah. So like looking at this verse without going into all of our commentaries that are going to try to explain what's going on here and why was Aaron struck with the silence. Looking at it at just the pshat meaning of the text, what might be going on here on a psychological level? Anita?
There's when you're in extreme grief, you don't have words.
Yeah.
And so it's very appropriate that Aaron would not have had an ability to say anything in that moment.
Yeah.
People come to you when you are in grief and say, all kinds of attempts to make you feel more comfortable, but none of it can make you feel comfortable.
Exactly. Yeah.
And none of it can make you have the words.
Yeah. And in my Talmud class that stands in, we've been learning in Moed Katan, the final chapter, which talks all about the laws of mourning. And the first thing that one does when they hear of the death of a loved one is they tear kriya, right? They're not, and it's kind of like a primal experience. It's an internal scream that like is represented by physically tearing their garments, because you're at a loss of words, right? And here Aaron was just there's nothing he can say, and we even learn also in the halacha that when you are in a state of mourning, that people should not greet you, and ask like, how are you? And try to like even offer words of comfort, because nothing really is going to bring you comfort in that moment. And the halacha tells us that the person in mourning has to go up to the comforters first, which is always hard. Like when we're walking into a house of Shiva, we want to go and provide comfort and speak to the mourner. But the halacha tells us to do quite the opposite. Allow the mourner to come to us. We don't want to necessarily cause them even more distress in that moment. And here, do you think what Moses said to his brother is helpful? No, say more.
First of all, it sounds like first of all, like Steve was saying, supposed to be merciful. I never see anywhere where he's really merciful. As they get further on into Israel, kill this one, kill that one, kill the children. And if he's so merciful, where was he during the Holocaust? So it's very hard for me to believe that there is a supreme being. And then when I read this, it sounds like he kills the two boys for no reason whatsoever. There's no reason. It doesn't matter how old they were or what they meant to do good. And he just assumes, okay, I'll kill them because they didn't follow my rules exactly, which would then make any normal person think, I'm not going with this guy. He's too strict. He leaves no room for my being normal or possibly not doing everything he wants.
Yeah.
I don't get this God. Actually, I don't get God, period. I just don't get it.
Yeah.
It sounds so cruel and mean, everything that's being done.
Yeah. I will say it is challenging to, fully base one's theology on the Torah itself. I think what helps is looking through the commentaries, looking through Midrash, Talmud, and then going through and reading more philosophy to kind of help establish a theology. There's also not just one way of understanding God. Anita and then Steve.
I already finished.
Oh, okay, so Steve.
I mean, I could echo Eileen. I mean, many of our prayers say God is merciful, God is loving, and these are not examples of that. They're the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
Are there midrash? I mean, did our sages confront this? What I see as a complete, a conflict, and address it and explain it. Is there midrash? Is there commentary in the Talmud, for example, that attempts to answer my concerns and Elaine's concerns?
I mean, I will say some of the commentaries that we're going to look at below some of you might not find comforting at all. As far as why Aaron's son died, and why Aaron was silent. It's not the most comforting moment. But I will say, to was it Jack who was talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and so we were, the idea of was that, but like getting too close to God is dangerous, and that's what Moses, I think, is trying to say here. In verse 3, it might not come out in a loving way, but he says, those who come close to me, God, I will make myself holy, and gain glory before all of the people. That if you get too close to me, I am so holy that like you can't really, you're a human being, and there's no way to get so close to God. And one of my favorite teachings from Hasidism is the idea of like we're constantly climbing this ladder to learn more and get closer and closer to God, but you can't get too close to God or you get burned, essentially, which kind of comes from this. But our job as human beings is to keep climbing that ladder, even if it gets kind of hot, because we will never actually get to the very top and fully know and understand God 100%. Our brains, our minds are unable to comprehend God on that level, according to the rabbis. And I agree, like we try and we strive for it, but ultimately, God is so much bigger than what we as human beings can fully grasp. And if we think we've gotten there and we think we have all of the answers and we know God fully, we will get burned because there's more to understand at some point. I don't know if, but I think that might be where Moses is going, at least for me, Steve.
To me, the contradiction of supposedly a loving, merciful God killing these, what I perceive as two innocent sons of Aaron,
Yeah.
it actually subverts God's goal of making the Jewish people successful and become good citizens of the world and be role models. So
Yeah. Well, I will say in my class at Ziegler with Rabbi Feinstein, I believe it was with Rabbi Feinstein last year, he told us that as much as we have been taught that God is all good, all knowing, all powerful, that God can't be those things because of history. That and you can take each of those aspects of God and you can say, well, there's no way that God is all knowing, because then why would there be war and famine, and how could the Holocaust have happened? God can't all be good because of all of the tragedies that have happened. So how do we still build a relationship with God, moving beyond those fundamental ideas, old school ideas of God? All right, Anita and then George.
These two young people took it on themselves to go do something, putting themselves before God. In other words, they're trying to usurp the position of God. And because of that, they aren't, they aren't being the type of priests that are needed. They are being egotistical.
Yeah.
And so if they can't become good priests, then they are consumed. So I unfortunately, I see this as tough punishment. When we have, fortunately, I didn't have to, but there are many people who have to put their children out because they're doing things that are inappropriate, on drugs and not getting rehab, all these things. And, a lot of people are having to do those.
Yeah.
So tough love.
I want us to think about that idea of like what were they trying to do in that moment, usurp power. Rashi is going to kind of touch on that, but I want to get to George.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
if we read to the next paragraph, they say, don't come drunk.
Yeah.
So maybe they were intoxicated,
Yeah, we don't know.
I mean, really profaning this rituals sort of thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Morton?
Yeah, I think what erases in my mind is as we're defining God, and why should we turn towards a God? It seems to me the Christians have a rationale to that seems to be practical to believe in God. It involves living after you're dead. It involves heaven. What's the Jewish rationale if we as a people have not seemed to have benefited at all by continuing to separate ourselves from our community at large?
Yeah. Kathleen?
I appreciate that people are raising these questions because I think they're really important. But I also think that we're approaching it in two ways that may not be the best. One of them is we're approaching it from our perspective. From our perspective, and the consequences in our lives, it doesn't appear that God's good. But what if we approached it, if God is good and this happened, what does that mean? What does that tell us? We have to start from a different assumption, not from our assumption of what God should be like. But if God is really good, then what is this story telling us? And approaching it from that perspective. And the other perspective, people ask, well, how can these injustices happen? How can the Holocaust happen? Well, we tend to blame God for it, and blaming God for it raises doubt. And then we start looking for confirmation of that doubt. And then we look at all available instances that confirm that doubt instead of going in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And I think we have to switch it from confirming our own biases versus looking at it from a different standpoint. Because what we're doing is we're doing confirmation biases.
Oh, certainly.
And if you want to blame somebody for the Holocaust, why not blame people? It's people who did this, not God.
Yeah.
And God is telling us we have to have order. And that's part of what this story tells us. We have to have an order. But if people aren't going to go up, this goes back to Morton's first question before it started. When should we speak out? And should rabbis speak out? Because nobody really spoke out. There were lots of famous people who didn't speak out. And Sachs goes through a whole list of them about the Holocaust who could have possibly made a significant change or helped earlier. Yeah. And yet we blame God for it.
Yeah. For me, when I think about like where was God in those moments, I have to tell myself that God wasn't the cause of any of these issues, but God was disappointed. God was mourning. God was crying. God was upset with humanity in these moments. But ultimately, it was down to human error, to human misjudgment, to human violence. Morton, last comment, then I want to move on.
Yeah, I think that people aren't necessarily blaming God for the Holocaust. Rather, they're saying if there is a God, a Jewish God, what purpose is he serving if the Holocaust occurred? And that's a very different question.
Certainly. But I think one thing that's interesting is it's like when we say the Kaddish, like mourner's Kaddish, it has nothing to do with with death. It's all about praising God in life. And it's like, why are we doing this in the moment when we are in mourning? And it's not, we're not blaming God. We're not upset with God. We're still in that moment as Jews. We have an obligation to connect with the divine in those moments. All right, I want us to read the Rashi. So he gets this from a midrash. Does someone want to read for us? Anybody? All right, I can read. So this is a comment on Vatete H. So, and there went out fire. Rabbi Eliezer said, the sons of Aaron died only because they gave decisions on religious matters in the presence of their teacher Moses. So they get this. This is from a Ravine in the Talmud. So this is one opinion, that they only died because they were trying to take over, religious matters, while their teacher Moses, who is the one getting the laws directly from God, and they are all of a sudden trying to make the decisions on what is appropriate and not. So this can go back to the Mar D'Atra comments, that if all of a sudden you have someone who is the halachic decider of a community, but then someone comes in, someone who's new, who's very young, says, we're going to completely change everything that we've been taught and that we've been doing overnight. And I'm going to do this in front of the person who makes all of those decisions. Right? And part of this is there's supposed to be respect for our teachers. In the Talmud, we learned that when a student goes into a Beit Midrash to study with their rabbi, right, they sit at the feet of their rabbi. Right, they are showing all of that respect. We also learn, I know in my Talmud class, that one of the people that you can actually like tear kriya for and mourn for is not just your the family members, but you can actually mourn for your rabbi, the person who taught you the most Torah in your life. They are equal to your parents, essentially. And all of a sudden we have Aaron's sons who are trying to, usurp power almost from Moses, the teacher, the person who has led everyone out of slavery, out of Egypt, and is giving them the law, is giving them the Torah, is creating something special. Any comments on Rabbi Eliezer's opinion? Doesn't mean he's right. It's just one of the responses our sages gave us. All right, so Eileen?
I think they give these responses because they don't really have the answer.
Yeah.
And so they try to make it nice, and
Yeah.
it's not nice.
Yeah. Yeah. But maybe we'll like the Rabbi Ishmael statement, because it does seem like he gets this from what happens next. I forgot who said it, if you continue reading in chapter 10 about being drunk. So Rabbi Ishmael also picks up on that. He says, they died because they entered the sanctuary intoxicated by wine. You may know that this is so, because after their death, he admonished those who survived that they should not enter when intoxicated by wine. So a parable that may be compared to a king who had a bosom friend, etc., as is to be found in Leviticus Rabbah. But the idea is, if you keep reading on, right after this, we get the laws that you should not enter the sanctuary drunk and go and pray or offer these sacrifices. So Rabbi Ishmael is using the text that comes next. He's using all of these clues to say, well, perhaps they were intoxicated. And it's a sign that you should not be drunk when you are connecting to the divine. Right? And we're not supposed to. There are all of these halachot of how you should actually enter into a place of prayer, right? As far as the way you're dressed, your bodily functions, all of these sort of things. You can't stand in a place of holiness and feel that presence of God if you are not fully yourself. So if you're focused, like the rabbis tell us, if you have to go to the bathroom, you can't pray the Amidah because you're only going to be focused on, I have to go to the bathroom, right? If certain people walk into the room and you're praying, who can you interrupt for and who can you not interrupt for? Like what's happening? There's the famous Mishnah of the snake on your heel. Do you keep praying or do you not keep praying? Like what is happening in these moments? Do you wear shoes? Do you not wear shoes when you're praying? Can you be intoxicated or not? Which, and if you are, some people might say, oh, it helped me feel more connected, but it's not. You're not yourself there. You have been, your mind has been altered in that moment. Which is why you should never do, Kiddush before services. You do it afterwards. And it's, you should be fully present, fully aware of who you are standing in front of. Dalifne mi omed, like, know who you are standing in front of. Be fully present, be fully aware of what's going on.
I have a question.
Yeah, sorry, who's Eileen?
If you're not supposed to, let's say, enter the temple if you're drunk, I don't know which holiday it is, whether it's
Purim? Sorry?
on one of the days you're supposed to celebrate and drink.
Yeah. I mean, so on Purim.
So this is all contradictory to begin with.
Yes. Well,
I'm sorry, I don't remember which holiday it is.
So there's multiple ones. I mean, on Purim, we have it's a rabbinic law because Purim, as far as drinking on Purim, so you don't know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. The rabbis also in the Talmud tell us, like, it's not about being drunk, it's about just not being fully aware. But on Purim, we completely switch things around. We also drink on Simchat Torah in celebration. But there are certain instances when you are reading from the Megillah or you're reading from the Torah on those holidays, that during those moments you're not supposed to be drinking. So when you go, even if you go to a big Megillah reading and they have a bar, the bar will be closed during the actual reading of the Megillah. You shouldn't have a drink next to you. You should still be aware of what is going on. Any other comments? All right, let's go on. So now we're going to keep reading Rashi. All right, so we got our answers according to Rashi. Why did Aaron's sons die? Either they were trying to teach Torah in front of Moses, or they were drunk. And again, it's not saying this is the only reason that we have this. These are just some explanations because the rabbis are uncomfortable with this. Just as we were uncomfortable with how could God be merciful and then kill Aaron's sons, the rabbis are trying to find a reason. Whether or not we agree with those reasons is okay. But the rabbis are saying, I'm a little uncomfortable and I need to find some sort of explanation for why they had to die. Rabbi Ishmael's, I think, makes the most sense because of what we have just a few verses later. He's really trying to build it into what's actually written in the Torah, where Rabbi Eliezer is trying to say, you don't teach Torah to your teacher. All right, so this is Rashi on Vayidom Aharon. So here it says, and Aaron was silent. Aaron received a reward for his silence. So here it uses the word shtikato. So for his silence. So kibel sachar al shtikato. So he received a merit or a reward for his silence. Uma sachar kibel. And what was the merit that he rewarded? All right. That the subsequent divine address was made to him alone and not to Moses alone. For to him alone was spoken the section verses 9 through 11, dealing with those who are intoxicated by wine. So I don't think I included this in the source sheets, but if we look, let me open the book, on verse 9, Vayidaber Adonai el Aharon lemor. And the Lord spoke to Aaron alone. It wasn't Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe el Aharon. So Aaron's reward, according to Rashi, was after this incident, when we get the laws of not being drunk when we are making sacrifices, that God spoke directly to Aaron, that Aaron was able to hear the voice by himself of the divine without being connected to Moses as well. So the question I ask is, would you ever stay silent in order to receive a reward? If something caused you deep pain and you wanted to shout out, in this moment, Aaron could have been angry at God and wanted to scream, but he remained silent, and for that, he received a reward of hearing the divine voice. So would you ever stay silent if there was a great reward? There's always these, Instagram reels I get. Would you do this X horrible thing for $1 million? And then someone responds with something funny. But here it's kind of saying that, would you ever not stand up for what could be an injustice to receive some sort of reward? I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if there's anyone who wants to share. Stan?
Well, often you remain silent because it's just better not to say anything than to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But it's you say to get a reward, I think you're getting back to the whole concept of what God is or who God is, and whether it's the God of the Torah, that the anthropomorphic God, or whether or not there's something more metaphorical or or transformation, whatever that is. These are the same questions we ask with every Torah portion. It may be more pronounced this time, but it's the same question.
Yeah. Nancy?
Besides, he had nothing to say. If his sons were drunk, there's nothing he could say that would change that.
Yeah. But I want us to focus on the idea of the reward. Is anything ever worth gaining something? Is losing something worth gaining something? Steve?
Well, in my mind, you always balance the gain versus the pain. To my view, Aaron was in a sense a victim. To gain a conversation with God and lose two sons, I'm not cool with that. That doesn't seem equal in any way or form. If God killed my children and then was rewarding me with a conversation, I'm an atheist. Sorry.
You'd hang up.
You hang up, yeah. Anyone else?
It should be about reward. It isn't about reward. In terms of what we're doing, we're supposed to be doing things because there's a logic to doing it, and it's right, and it makes a better world. If you're talking about reward and punishment, that goes back to children.
Yeah.
You want children to learn from the reward and punishment how to behave in a society and be civilized and make a better society. And I think we should take the reward part off the table in that sense.
Okay. All right, let's keep going. So this is Or HaChaim. He is going to
Rabbi, what is the Hebrew word that is reward?
So like merit or reward. Right there.
Okay. Thank you.
So Or HaChaim, so he's going to focus on the strange fire which God did not command them. The words which God had not commanded them define the nature of the strangeness of the fire. It is possible that if these two sons of Aaron had taken the fire for their incense from the altar, God would not have minded so much. It is also possible that God would have minded for a different reason. At any rate, the sin consisted in their doing something on their own initiative, which God had not commanded them. So the issue, according to Or HaChaim, is, what did they do that was wrong?
God didn't command them.
God did not command them. So what this kind of makes me think about is when people do something in the name of God, right? And that thing may be something inappropriate, something horrendous, right? God doesn't want that. You should not say, I'm doing this in the name of God, right? Because that is not going to be, there's not going to be a positive outcome of that, unless it is, doing a mitzvah, something that's positive for the world, something that's like can help heal the world. That can be, for the sake of God. But completely going that, doing something on your own initiative and God didn't want you to do it at all, and you're trying to do this on behalf of God, it's not okay. Morton?
If we, I'm not quite sure if this was part of the culture at the time in ancient Israel. In other words, could this just have been something to teach the community a lesson, to want the community to conduct themselves in a certain way, if it was historically connected to the time, and we're trying to interpret it in such a way to make it relevant to our time, but it has nothing to do with that. It was meaningful as far as they wanted their populace to conduct themselves in a certain way.
Yeah. Anita and then George.
These two children would have known that Pharaoh considered himself God.
Mm-hmm.
So they were trying to usurp God's presence by doing their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not an uncommon thing for them to think.
Yeah.
Because of Pharaoh thinking he was God, and that was normal. So I'm still with the thing that they did something wrong, they got punished.
Yeah. George?
Yeah, going back a few people ago here. And when people do things, they claim in the name of God, I think we're really concerned when it's man versus man,
Mm-hmm.
Killing people, or, this is man, to God.
Yeah.
It's a different,
Yeah.
You're not murdering people, okay? You're sinning this way, not
not
horizontally.
Morton? Oh, okay. Let's look at one more. There's a lot of sources on here, so you can feel free to look at them over Shabbos. But I want us to look at Rashbam. So this is Rashi's grandson. So he says, he's commenting on V'tetzei eish malifnei Hashem. So when the fire went out before God. So at the time, the heavenly fire emanated in order to consume the sacrificial meat on the altar in the courtyard of the temple. It consumed the two sons of Aaron on its way. This fire had meant to consume only the incense, but seeing that the sons of Aaron had been in its way, it consumed them also and they died as a result. So here it seems that Rashbam is trying to take the blame away from God, or even kind of the idea of being punished. And it's kind of they were in the way. They stood too close to the fire. The fire was going to take the sacrifice and it was going to consume it, but it's a fire, right? And they're in an enclosed space. The fire got out of control. They stood physically too close to it, and the fire burned them and ultimately killed them. But that was not what God had intended, according to Rashbam. What do we make of this?
I don't think the fire would do what God didn't intend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it goes back to God wants two things. He wants us to reach for him, but he doesn't want us to overstep, because he wants us rooted to do his will on earth. And if we're too far out, we're not doing that. And I think he's also saying that there's an orderliness that's required, because they often compare building the temple to the creation story, and there's order in both of them and precision in both of them. And that we have to follow the same precision in terms of how we exhibit holiness, because we are distinguishing ourselves from idolaters.
Yeah. So this fire on the in the tabernacle, it's a different type of fire than, say, a wildfire, right? Which, if God can control this fire, why can't God control the wildfire? And why do innocent people have to be in the way of that? If God can control one type of fire, why not control all of it? I want to kind of challenge us theologically. There's no right answer, but like what makes this different, and why could God control this fire and Aaron's sons weren't just in the way, but they had to die? But any sort of wildfire is uncontrollable.
Well, that's disorder.
That's this okay. So that the wildfire is chaos, but this fire has a specific order and can be controlled.
To me, this is Rashbam's way of taking the blame away directly from God's decision.
Yeah, yeah. And in Rashbam, he's a generation later. He's the grandson of Rashi. So I think his theology is obviously very different than that of his grandfather. And it seems like he's trying to say, what, we're not even going to talk, like God's not even mentioned in his comments, right? He is solely focusing on Aaron's sons being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were just physically too close to it. It's not that God didn't want that to happen. That's what Rashbam's trying to reconcile. Where it seems like Rashi said, that Rashi doesn't give his own opinion, if we notice, right? Rashi quotes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Ishmael, so Rashi kind of stays out of his own opinion, but he says, they died because of either X or Y that these rabbis said. But Rashbam seems to give his own interpretation. Let's see. Should we keep going? I know it's like we're past 1 o'clock. Should we keep going or should we pause there?
Keep going.
You can keep going. Okay. So this is another Rashbam. So now he's focusing on Mutu Lifnei Hashem, like that they died before God. So they died in the section of the tabernacle described as in the presence of the Lord. As soon as the news reached Aaron, he wanted to interrupt performing the service in order to mourn his sons.
What was the service that
The
he
service
was?
of the sacrifices. So
Not
why?
mentioning the temple.
Wait a minute. You said, do you mean Aaron was in there at the same time as his boys?
Well, Aaron was not necessarily in there with them, right? They took the fire, they put it in there,
What is it? Interrupt performing this meant that he was already doing some kind of service.
Well, they were in the
But
middle of, they were going through all of the rituals of the sacrifices. This is the eighth day. This is the beginning of them really starting this new sacrificial worship service. This is really the origin of it. And Aaron was probably, I don't know, he was busy preparing things. And Aaron did not stop when he heard the news that his sons passed away. He was preparing the sacrifices, the incense, anything else, right? And if we keep going, Rashbam says this is the honor according to God's presence, that even when one sees one's son dying, one ignores one's personal grief and continues with the service to one's creator. So Rashbam says, even though he saw that his sons died, because Aaron was in the middle of doing avodah, of doing service for God and for the Israelite people, that is what takes precedent over grief. Which is interesting to go back to what we're learning in the Talmud class. When a loved one dies before the burial, you're in a state of anenut. It's this in-between stage before the burial, and you are exempt from specific mitzvot. You're exempt from the Shema. You're exempt from the tefillin. All of these things. So it's like, you'd think that if, what Rashbam is saying, that service to God is more important than grieving, well, what about what ultimately becomes the halacha, that you have to, that all of your other obligations really do pause. They don't stop completely, but you pause them so you can take care of what needs to be done as far as the preparing for the burial. And then, as we learn in the Talmud class, the second day of mourning is when you put on tefillin once again. So we'll this will be the last thing we'll do one more Rashbam, and then we'll wrap it up. So Rashbam says also, he comments on V'yidom Aharon, that he desisted from his mourning. He did not weep and he did not perform rites of the mourning, meaning that Aaron did not tear kriya. Aaron did not go through any of the grieving process. He just kept on going with his life. Okay. Kathleen?
But I think this is different, because this was the inauguration of the temple.
Yeah.
This wasn't a regular service. This was when on the eighth day God was going to dwell among their presence. God hadn't come down before the 7 days of inauguration. This is a huge deal. This isn't
this isn't just Shabbos morning service. This is the first service, in the history of services.
Right. So I think that's what is not interrupting, because God says don't mourn just at this moment, because this whole ceremony, including the sacrifice, it was kind of a sacrifice of the son, is about that. But we're not gonna, he's saying we don't sacrifice ourselves in that way to God. I think it comes back to that.
Yeah, true. And it's also, Rashbam is not saying that Aaron did not mourn at all. It was in this moment, Aaron did not mourn because there was something that needed to be done. In his role as Kohen Gadol, he needed to be present on behalf of the community.
Right.
Learn to go back to the Talmud class, and this really is just a plug to join the Talmud class on Fridays. But there's the idea that if you are in mourning, so if you have Shiva and then there is a Chag, so let's say Sukkot comes, Pesach comes, and the obligation of rejoicing for the Chag and being with community is actually on a higher status than mourning. So people don't come for Shiva during Chag. Your mourning has kind of stopped. Shiva is over when Chag comes in, because that is kind of what's happening in the cycle of the year. You have to go and participate on behalf of the community. It doesn't mean that you're not in pain. right now, Aaron was certainly grieving internally, but he knew that he had to continue his avodah because this is not about him in this moment. This is about the 600,000 people that are camped around the tabernacle.
Yeah, Rabbi?
Yeah.
I had learned way back that a public celebration takes precedent over your private mourning.
Yeah.
So this would be a public celebration, this inauguration. So you kind of have to put your mourning, back a little bit,
Exactly.
you
put it on pause.
Yeah.
And you go and you celebrate. Doesn't mean that you're not like mentally holding two places at once where you want to cry, but you also have to celebrate and to be joyous. And from Moed Katan, it tells us, B'chageka samecha, like you on your holidays you shall rejoice, or vice versa. That verse means that that's your obligation in that moment. Even though you just lost a loved one, you still have to go and celebrate Pesach. You still have an obligation to the tradition and to the community and go to a seder. You still have to go and into a sukkah. You still have to go and wave the lulav and etrog and all of that. But then you can go and mourn privately and all of that. And that's exactly, I think, what's happening here.
I have to leave, so Shabbat Shalom to everybody. I have an appointment.
Thank you.
And thank you for class. It was great.
Oh, thank you. Any I know we went over. I get very excited. Any last minute comments?
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And please, use this source sheet. There's so many other things I included. And use it on Shabbat, use it in the future. It's a 3 verses that are very, very powerful that, obviously we saw how much we can share just about a few moments in our Torah.
I'm not getting the source sheets. People
Getting the
talked
source
about that before. Can I give you my email so that I can get the source sheet too?
Yeah, put it in the chat and then I will share it with Kirby.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure how to get it into the chat.
If you hit the little 3 dots on the right side, do you see that?
Okay.
Where it says more?
I said where it says search emoji.
No. It should say more, and then you can go up and it says chats.
Under reactions. Oh, here I see chat. I see chat. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, and Bob, you're not getting them either? Bob, you want to put your email in there as well?
There you go.
Right. I will have Kirby add you to the list.
Okay, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And Bob, what's your email address, Bob?
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Did you
All
get
right. I got it. Thank you.
it? Okay.
Shabbat Shalom.